Gotham Knights is set to be in its own continuity, separate from the Batman Arkham franchise. What this means is we're likely going to see some characters, and especially villains, taken from the Arkham franchise and brought back for Gotham Knights, potentially being reimagined, redesigned, and repurposed for a new potential franchise. However, today, I'd like to focus on some characters that didn't really get to shine in the Arkham franchise. While they may have been referenced, teased, or hinted at in the games, these characters never actually fully appeared in the Batman Arkham franchise, and I'd also like to explain what I'd like to see from them and why I'd like to see them included in Gotham Knights. Now, first on the list is the Ventriloquist and Scarface, and specifically I'd like to see the Arnold Wesker incarnation of the Ventriloquist. Now, this was probably the villain that was most hinted at, teased, and referenced in the Arkham franchise that we never got to see make a fully fledged appearance. There were references to the Ventriloquist and Scarface in Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Knight. However, we never actually saw a full appearance of the Ventriloquist, though we did see the Scarface dummy in numerous locations throughout the franchise, in Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and in Arkham Knight. Although by Arkham Knight, it seemed that Peyton Riley had taken up the mantle of the Ventriloquist. But I'd like to focus on Arnold Wesker, the first and most prominent Ventriloquist. So I think implementing the Ventriloquist and Scarface into the sort of open-world Batman game would be very simple, actually. It could be similar to the gangs that we saw in Arkham City, where they were controlled by Two-Face, Joker, or Penguin, and they had a sort of allegiance to their own crime lord. The Ventriloquist and Scarface could have their own gang operating throughout Gotham City. Furthermore, there have been the rumors of WB Games Montreal introducing a Nemesis system into Gotham Knights. And I think such a system would be very easily applied to the Ventriloquist and Scarface. Taking out some of his operations, running drugs, or, smuggling guns. I think there could be a lot of potential here. And I think there's also a compelling story to be told about the character. Arnold Wesker suffers from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, formerly known incorrectly as multiple personality disorder, but it's not really a personality disorder. Essentially, Wesker has this alter of the Scarface, and Scarface is a detriment to Wesker's life, putting him in legal trouble and physical pain against the Dark Knight. So I think you could tell a compelling side story and a sympathetic character story about Arnold Wesker. We saw this in Batman the Animated Series, and in Arkham Knight we actually saw Kirk Langstrom portrayed as a sympathetic villain whose actions were out of his own control, in that sense mainly physically, whereas Arnold Wesker, things are mentally out of his control because his alter Scarface is carrying out so many of these decisions. Now, I think this is going to be a sharp turn from that serious subject matter of mental illness and mental health and going straight into campy ridiculousness, but I think it would be fun to include Killer Moth in Gotham Knights. Now, the game developers have come out and said you can play through Gotham Knights with one character all the way through. However, what I'd like to see in the game is different personal touches in how different Gotham Knight playable characters interact with NPCs. So maybe Barbara Gordon interacts with GCPD differently than Jason Todd would. And I think Killer Moth could be a very good example of this. In the comics, Killer Moth is actually the first villain that Batgirl fights and squares off against. So I think having unique dialogue between Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, and Killer Moth could sort of make a fun and interesting dynamic rather than if you just played through the entire game with Nightwing or Robin. And I think Killer Moth's campiness and ridiculousness could actually be a good thing for Gotham Knights. Because let's think back to the Arkham franchise. It was a very sort of gritty, dark, and sort of tonally serious universe. Minus the Joker's, fun, goofy nature. It was mainly serious and sort of focused on some of the more realistic aspects of the Batman character. But I think there's another side of Batman. The sort of campy rogues that you face off against. The goofy villains from another era of comics. And I think bringing them in and sort of having them in these ridiculous costumes with these silly names, maybe even silly motives, could show that Batman is more than just that grim, serious character we've seen in the modern interpretations of the character. So I think if they're wanting to start off a new franchise in a new universe, taking the opportunity to introduce this campy, ridiculous side of Batman's rogues gallery could be a very smart strategy. And this actually leads into the next character on the list, which is Crazy Quilt. Again, a very wacky, ridiculous character. But again, I think there's a lot of potential for the personalization of interactions between the Gotham Knights playable characters and the villains with Crazy Quilt. Now, for a bit of backstory, in the comics, Crazy Quilt was actually blinded by Dick Grayson's Robin, and it caused a vendetta against Robin, stronger than that hatred that he feels towards Batman, actually. He sees Robin as a bigger enemy than Batman. And even when Dick Grayson leaves and Jason Todd takes up the Robin mantle, Crazy Quilt still harbors this hatred against Robin. Now, in Gotham Knights, Jason Todd is no longer Robin and Tim Drake is. So I think there could be a lot of fun here with interactions between Crazy Quilt and Dick Grayson, Crazy Quilt and Jason Todd, and Crazy Quilt and Tim Drake. I think you could have that sort of fun, interesting dynamic between him and each of these past and current Robins. And furthermore, I think there's a fun sort of potential in how you would face off against him. He's got the ridiculous lasers and the goofy helmet. But again, I think that goofiness is something that the Arkham games lacked in a actual fun part of Batman's mythos. And this is sort of getting a bit tinfoil conspiracy. But in an interview, Patrick Redding, the creative director for Gotham Knights, actually talked about the gear system for the game. And in talking about the gear system, he was talking about skins and gear and how they conflict, and mentioned wanting to avoid crazy quilt patterns on your skins. Now, while Crazy Quilt is a terminology for these sort of mixed and matched, randomly patched together designs, I don't know necessarily if that's entirely a coincidence. When you use the phrase Crazy Quilt when talking about a Batman game, there's a villain who's literally named Crazy Quilt. Again, maybe that's just me reading too into things, but maybe he's dropping hints or subconsciously thinking about Crazy Quilt. Who knows? I think he'd be fun to see, and I'd love to see him included in his own side mission in Gotham Knights. Now, once again, we're going to take things back to the more serious route with Lockup. Now, similar to Harley Quinn, Lockup originated in Batman the Animated Series before being transferred over to the DC Comics universe. I think Lockup could be a lot of fun because he deals with a sort of theme on street justice and brutality. Similar to the Punisher, where, you might consider what line is too far for a character to cross when they're implementing their own brand of justice in the city outside of the legal system. So I think there could be a lot of fun commentary on that, especially coming into conflict between the Gotham Knights and Lockup in how you treat criminals and how you handle the criminal justice system. And within the narrative of Gotham Knights, I think there's a lot of potential here as well. Bruce Wayne dies and Batman basically vanishes, and so the Gotham Knights need to step up. So I think it could be fun to see Lockup sort of take up the mantle of Lockup as a response to the disappearance of Batman. Maybe he thinks Batman was too lenient, maybe he sees himself as the successor to Batman. I think it would be very interesting to see how he would handle that and how he'd take his own fight against crime. And I think you could also have a sort of fun introduction to this storyline and side quest. Maybe on the GCPD radio, you overhear a ridiculous character like the Ten-Eyed Man or Condiment King being spotted halfway across the city. And so you track them down there, and right as you're about to apprehend them, you come and see Lockup just wailing on them, beating them to a pulp, leaving them for dead. And when you get there, you realize, this person has to be stopped. And so rather than, initially thinking it's going to be, just another silly side quest, one-off, it instead turns into, we need to stop Lockup from doing this to other villains and leaving them for dead, because that's not the way we operate. So I think it could be a very fun sort of approach to the side mission and a different change in the rhythm of how these operate, rather than just, tracking down dead bodies and tracking down the villain and then doing a side boss fight. I think there could be a lot of fun potential in changing up the formula. Now, the fifth villain I'd like to see introduced in Gotham Knights that we didn't get to see in the Arkham franchise would be Cluemaster. And I think there could be a lot of fun potential in differentiating Cluemaster from the Riddler. I wouldn't mind seeing the Riddler return if you solely focus on riddles. Scanning riddles across the city. I don't want Riddler trophies, I don't want Riddler challenges. I don't want puzzles with the Batmobile and gadgets. I think if you leave it to just plain old riddles, and instead have Clue Master take up that other portion, it could be a lot of fun. Clue Master having puzzles and games and quizzes, I think it'd be a lot of fun in setting up this new character. And furthermore, you could have a conflict between Clue Master and the Riddler, similar to the conflict between Penguin and Two-Face in Arkham City. And even beyond just being a villain in and of himself, I think including Clue Master opens up the potential for Stephanie Brown to be included in a future Gotham Knights game. Stephanie Brown is the daughter of Clue Master, who takes up the hero moniker of the Spoiler and becomes Batgirl herself. So I think if you look at a potential future for the Gotham Knights franchise and think about which other characters you'd like to pull from the comics to include in the Gotham Knights Bat family, Stephanie Brown would be on that list. And introducing Clue Master in this game could sort of expand the world to be like, hey, Stephanie Brown is in this universe. Here's her father, Clue Master. Maybe she'll make an appearance in future installments of this franchise. So I think Clue Master could be interesting, not just as a villain you face off against, but as an aspect of this broader world and the lore of the Gotham Knights universe. So these are the 5 villains I'd love to see in Gotham Knights that never got to appear in the Arkham franchise. Let me know which 5 you'd like to see. Let me know who you'd like to see from this list. Let me know who you wouldn't like to see from this list. Let me know which characters should have made the list. And I'll see you guys next time.